Hi, it's Gary Glenn, your drone test wizard. And in this comprehensive presentation, we will have a serious look at what it takes to pass the FAA test to be certified to fly your drone commercially. Of course, if you are planning to do any sort of work with your drone and it's deemed to be enhancing your business or any business, even if you're not charging any money for it, you are considered as using it for commercial purposes. And hence, it's true that you're going to need to pass the FAA Part 107 drone exam certification exam test, and you'll need to become certified with the FAA. It's true that there are lots and lots of courses that you can attend or use online to learn and study. And they, of course, do vary in duration and in price. And most of them that I've seen are in the $200 to $500 category, and I know they're very, very good. I chose not to use an outside course to get my exam test done. And instead, I did a self-study program and worked with practice tests. And that is what I'm suggesting that you do. If you are diligent and willing to put in the study time, you'll pass the test. Of course, this video is pretty long. It is the definitive study guide to pass the test. My objective here is to give you the fundamentals and the foundation that you'll need to do well. And then, of course, I'm inviting you to purchase my definitive practice question guide, which is a list of over 250 questions and answers that are the type of questions that you will be asked on the actual test. Now, it's important to know the test is a lot harder than you might think. It's 60 questions and it's multiple choice. And they will use a random selection process to get the questions from many that they have to draw from. The FAA could ask you from lots of questions. It's a pretty comprehensive test. Now, the private pilot's license test to fly a small private aircraft is also 60 questions. And much of what you need to know to be a private pilot will be what you need to know to be a drone pilot. I know, through this whole class, you of course will be asking, why the heck do I need to know how to read a pilot weather forecast? And many other bits of information and questions that relate to flying airplanes. But what the FAA wants you to be able to do is to understand the procedures that private and other aircraft in your airspace will be doing and why. It's all about getting a clear understanding of what aviation is all about, not just flying your drone around your local park. I personally put in about 12 hours of study time. And in that time, I watched a number of tutorial videos online and hunted down the best practice tests I could find. I did that over maybe a couple of weeks and then scheduled the test. I passed the test the first time I took it with a 92% score. You need a minimum of 70 to pass. And I got to tell you, I still thought that it was a pretty hard test and was very glad that I had put in the study time and had the confidence that the practice tests had given me. At the time of making this video, the fee to take the test is $150, which is another reason why we would all rather pass the test on the first go round and not have to pay to take it again. So just Google to find the FAA testing center in your area and then book it in advance to fit in with your schedule. Be sure to take a photo ID with your current address or an ID with some sort of utility bill with your current address on it. It's a good idea to show up early for the test and be relaxed and free of anxiety about getting there. I was there about a half an hour early. Now, as you take the test, there's no need to rush through it. You'll be given 2 hours to complete the test. I managed to get through it in about 50 minutes. So be ready to really study this video, not just having it on in the background while you do something else. And take notes while you're watching. And of course, what I've done is compiled the definitive sample question list. Let me say again that there's over 250 sample questions that will give you the key questions that are like the ones you will get on your test, your actual test. Now, you never know what the mix of questions will be on the actual test when you get there, so you will want to make sure that you do take the time to study and practice and memorize and get all of the sample test questions right consistently before you pay your $150 and go and take the test. Now, my list is not expensive. It's only $32 and it's downloadable right away to get you started. Now, I've got to tell you that if I had had this list of 250 questions that I finally compiled, it would have made the whole process a heck of a lot easier to prepare for the actual test. So study hard and then spend a few bucks to get the info that will really help you, and you will likely pass on your first go-round. I've always said that there's 3 keys to success. Number 1 is to prepare. Number 2 is to prepare. And yeah, you guessed it, number 3 is to prepare. Just remember that preparation is the key to your success on this test. So plan to be really ready. Again, there's lots of information here that will seem irrelevant to you. You're not an airplane pilot, and you will be frustrated with what you have to learn. But trust me, this is just the way it is, and the FAA has their reasons for this. You've just got to learn it. So relax and try to make it interesting and see it as important, even make it fun and kind of a hobby. Okay, let's jump into some of the basic things that you'll need to know. We'll start with some of the basic laws and some of the basic regulations, and as you work through this training workshop, break up the viewing time. I'm going to give you these numbers at the very beginning here, but remember that everybody has a tolerance of how long they can watch this kind of information before smoke starts to come out of their ears. So have a look on the website page, the free test workshop, where you access this video, and take a look at the bottom underneath this video, and you'll see the breakdown of the time on the workshop, and you'll be able to watch a segment or 2 at a time. Then take a break and come back to it when you're mentally ready. The little table of contents that's listed down underneath this video will also help you to come back and re-study particular topics. But watching these chapters several times really will make a difference in your understanding of the material and your preparation. Now, there are some numbers that you'll need to memorize and know. So take some notes, plan to be prepared to memorize these, and you'll get them right on the test. The minimum weight, our first number, to register a drone with the FAA is 0.55 pounds. This is the minimum weight of a drone that must be registered with the FAA if you're using the drone for commercial purposes. At the time this video is being made, hobbyists do not need to register their drone. This hobbyist regulation was changed at the end of 2017. It used to be that every drone had to be registered, but now the law is that if it's not being used for commercial purposes, it does not have to be registered. If yours would weigh less than 0.55 pounds, it doesn't have to be registered. But 0.55 pounds or over must be registered, and the number on the high end of that scale is under 55 pounds. That's the maximum weight with all the cameras, the battery, or anything else that's attached to the drone. So if it's 55 pounds or over, it's too heavy to be registered as legal. So it must be that your drone is under 55, so 0.55 to under 55 pounds are the number. That's the number to remember. And don't think that 55 pounds is legal. It's under 55 pounds. And there was a question about this on the test that I was given. And sometimes these test questions are kind of tricky. Remember, it's under 55 pounds. These are the registration high and low limits. Now, it's possible to get an exemption to fly heavier if you want to be able to do that, and we'll talk about that and other exemptions and waivers a little later on. But you might get a question on how to fly a heavier than the limit drone. The answer is with an exemption with a waiver. Here's a sample from the sample question booklet that I've compiled for you. Under what conditions would a small UAS not have to be registered before it is operated in the United States? A, when the aircraft weighs less than 0.55 pounds on takeoff, including everything that is on board or attached to the aircraft. B, all small UAS need to be registered regardless of the weight of the aircraft before, during, or after the flight. And C, when the aircraft has a takeoff weight that is more than 0.55 pounds, but less than 55 pounds, not including fuel and necessary attachments like the battery. Now, remember the question was, which one does not have to be registered? So the answer is A. Remember to read the questions very carefully. The question was, When would a small UAS not have to be registered? The answer is when it weighs less than 0.55 pounds, with everything on board. The next number, 16 years of age is the minimum age to qualify as a certified drone pilot. Again, this was a question that I got on my test. Originally, when all drones had to be registered, you had to be 13 years of age to register. But now, because they're only commercially requiring us to register, it's 16 years of age. And as I said, there was a question on the test that I was given about this. And there are others like that will kind of help you in my test question list. It's important to remember that the questions on the test may very well read kind of different from the questions on the sample tests. I found that there were similar questions, but they were not exactly the same wording. So just memorizing the sample test will not give you the definitive answers, but it will give you the example and the logic to get the answers right on the questions that you are asked. I've tried to include as many questions on my sample test question list that will give you the best chance of passing with the FAA questions that you're given. 400 feet. The next rule is to know that you must fly your drone within a maximum height of 400 feet above the ground. You'll see AGL, which means above ground level, and that means 400 feet is the maximum height that's allowed. One of the questions on my test asked when it might be necessary to fly above 400 feet. And the answer was it would be necessary to avoid another aircraft in an emergency. This is on the sample tests. By the way, you don't need to report that you've flown above 400 feet unless there is some sort of incident. Now, there's a question in my sample questions that deals with this. Here's a sample. To avoid a possible collision with a manned airplane, you estimated that your small UA climbed to an altitude greater than 600 feet above ground level. To whom must you report this deviation? A, the FAA upon request. B, Air Traffic Control. C, the National Transportation Safety Board. The correct answer to this question is A, the FAA on request. If you did fly above 400 feet without an incident, you don't need to report it. But if for any reason you're requested to, there was some sort of incident, the report is to the FAA. You are allowed to fly higher than 400 feet if you are flying above a structure. The number here is 400 feet above the structure. So if you are flying above a 500-foot wind turbine or a 500-foot tall building, you're allowed to fly a total of 900 feet above the ground, 400 above the 500-foot structure. The rule is, in order to do that, you must stay flying within a 400-foot distance horizontally from the structure at that altitude. So if you're gone up to a 500-foot building and gone 400 feet above it, you have to stay 400 feet horizontally from the edges of the structure, the edges of the building or the turbine or whatever it is at that higher altitude. So just remember, 400 feet above the structure and 400 feet horizontally adjacent to it. There'll probably be a question on this. The next rule to remember relates to flying around clouds. Now the number to remember here is 500. 500 feet below cloud. So if a cloud is at 600 feet, you would not be able to fly up to the 400-foot minimum that you're 400-foot maximum that you're allowed to. You would only be able to fly up to, if you think about it, the cloud is at 600 minus the 500 that you have to avoid the cloud, you would only be able to fly a maximum of 100 feet off the ground when cloud is present. You must be, when cloud is present, 500 feet below that cloud. Now, the other number that relates to clouds is that you must be 2,000 feet horizontally from the cloud. So if there is some clouds at 900 feet, you may be able to fly up to your 400 feet, but 500 feet below the cloud, but you've got to stay 2,000 feet away from the cloud horizontally. You may be asked about flying to something like a cloud in your questions. I'm sure you'll get a question about this. You also may be wanting to fly next to a radio tower or another situation where there are guy wires. The legal number to remember when it relates to guy wires, in this instance, is 2,000. That's 2,000 feet horizontally away from guy wires. That's the number to remember. The maximum speed of your drone for any flight is 100 miles an hour or 86 knots. Remember this one. It was on the test that I was given, 100 miles an hour. Another question that was on my test, and is certainly in my definitive sample question ebook that you can get, is this question. What is the minimum horizontal distance or visibility that is required to fly your drone? The answer is 3 statute miles. Before you take off, you must be able to see that there is clear visibility relating to weather or fog or haze or smog. You've got to be able to see 3 miles out. And we're going to learn how to read weather reports to determine what the visibility is in an area where you're planning to fly. Just remember, 3 statute miles. And you may see it abbreviated to SM, which stands for statute miles. The other rule here is that you, in addition to being able to see out for 3 statute miles, the law is that you must, while flying, maintain sight of the drone while you're flying it, without using binoculars or other vision assistance, except for your glasses or your contacts. Now, I can't really imagine that 3 miles of visibility is really necessary, as you're never going to be able to keep the drone in sight for 3 miles out. It'll be a speck in a very short distance. But the required visibility for taking off, you must be able to see for 3 statute miles horizontally, and you must be able to maintain sight of your drone during the entire duration of the flight. So even though you can fly out for 3 miles, you've got to be able to see it. It's not practical to imagine that you'll be able to see your drone for 3 miles out. But here's a question. The UAS must remain close enough to the remote pilot in command and the person manipulating the flight controls, and they should be able to see the aircraft, A, unaided by any device other than corrective lenses, B, with binoculars, C, with an infrared camera. The correct answer here is A, unaided by any device other than corrective lenses. The next rule is one that must be complied to by all pilots and not just drone pilots. It's related to alcohol consumption. The number to remember is 8 hours. This is the legal time that you must wait after having your last drink before you can fly. We say in aviation, 8 hours from the bottle to the throttle. And that is the number that you have to remember. Now, the other number in relation to this is 0.04. This is the maximum blood alcohol level that you be able to display in order for you to fly legally. So even if you've stopped drinking 8 hours ago, if you've been on a real bender and had a large amount of booze and you were still over 0.04 8 hours later, you're illegal. So remember, the numbers are 8 hours, bottle to the throttle, and 0.04 blood alcohol in your system. And you may get a question that asks what the penalty is if you refuse to give a blood alcohol level test. The answer is suspension or revocation of your certification. They can take away your license if you will not submit to a blood alcohol test. That is a question in the sample test question list. It was on my test as well. Now, another question that was included on my test that related to any narcotic conviction. The number to remember here is that you will not be allowed to fly for 1 year after the date of any narcotic conviction. Not from the time you're arrested, from the date of the conviction. So far as I've given you these numbers and these basic rules, I can imagine you can see there's a lot of common sense in these questions and answers, but you need to have all of these numbers memorized. It's kind of like a driving license. It's important to know all of these regulations, as there will certainly be some questions relating to these issues on your test. Be sure to refer to my definitive 250 question practice test list to be sure that you're set up with these and all of the other information that you're going to need to know. You can download it right away if you want. Next question, can we fly at night? The answer is no, not without exemption granted by the FAA. Now, many of these rules can be exempted if you want to go through the hoops to get allowed to do anything different than the regulation. For example, flying close to an airport, or as I just mentioned, flying at night. We can't fly at night. We can't fly close to an airport. Flying faster than 100 miles an hour. Flying higher than 400 feet. These are examples of things that you may be allowed to do if the FAA deems that you can do it safely for the duration of the flight that you're planning. And there are portals online to the FAA to get this exemption. You make the application there. Now, the other thing is you're required to get this permission for any waiver or any exemption 90 days prior to the flight you are planning. Just remember that number. It'll probably be on your test. 90 days prior to the planning. Now, this, of course, makes it rather impractical in the real world to get a waiver. I mean, I understand that we may see some simplifying of some of these rules and relaxing of these rules of 90 days before the flight, but at the time of making this video, and probably when you take your test, the rule is you need permission 90 days before your flight. And it's likely or unlikely that you will get a question, let me just say that it's likely that you will get a question related to this. I certainly did on my test. The legal limit for flying early or late in the day is defined as 30 minutes of what's called civil twilight. Now, this is defined as 30 minutes before sunrise and 30 minutes after sunset. And to fly within these times, your drone has to be fitted with anti-collision lights that can be seen for 3 statute miles. Again, I did have a question about this topic, and you will see examples in my sample question list and the ebook PDF that you can order with all the questions. Here's the question. No person may operate a small unmanned aircraft system outside of civil twilight for purposes of subsection B of this section. Civil twilight refers to A, 30 minutes before official sunrise, 30 minutes after official sunset local time. B, when the moon is out. C, the Weather Channel official sunset time. Now, because of what I just told you, I'm sure you can see the correct answer is A, 30 minutes before official sunrise, 30 minutes after official sunset local time. And there was one other question. Here's another one relating to the anti-collision lights. When a SUAS operation, when SUAS operations are conducted during civil twilight, small UA must be equipped with A, strobe lights, B, anti-collision lights, C, a night vision camera. And as I said earlier, of course, the answer is B, anti-collision lights. Another number to remember is $500. This is the amount that is the limit in case your drone causes an accident and it results in damage to property other than your drone. So if you've got a $2,000 drone and you trash your drone in the accident and that's the only damage, you do not have to file a report with the FAA. But if there is damage to other property of $500 or more, you must file an FAA accident and damage report. And this must be done within a period of, and this is another number you'll need to know, 10 days of the accident. So remember, in case of an accident, $500 or more in property damage, and 10 days to file the report with the FAA. Another question you're likely to see and will see in the sample question booklet, and likely to see one on the test, it was certainly on my test, is about personal injury. If a person is injured to the point that hospitalization for 48 hours or more is necessary, you must file a report to the FAA. If there is an injury where there are only some minor bruises or little cuts, you don't have to file a report. Only in the case of a more serious injury. Again, hospital for 48 hours or more. Now this also, of course, highlights the importance of being insured as a drone pilot. If you'd hit a car or a building, or heaven forbid, hit a person and cause some damage or serious injury, you may very well be liable, and insurance is really important. And if you're doing this work professionally and commercially, it's really valuable for your client to know that you are licensed and insured. Now, the numbers I've given you are very important to know, and they're very important to remember, of course, for safety when you're out flying your drone. But importantly, this is what this workshop is all about. There will be questions on the test that relate to these requirements. So in addition to being a better pilot, we're about getting through the test. So study and memorize and be able to confidently repeat these numbers. Now might be a good time to take a break for a few minutes. Stop the video and review your notes, and then get up and do something different for a little while. Walk around the house or the office where you are, and then come back when you're ready. It might even be an hour or later, it might even be tomorrow. But review your notes and then start on this next chapter, which is a big one. It's about airspace. Okay, let's launch into this next chapter and look at a very important area of legally flying your drone. If you've done any flying yet, you've likely found that when you use the apps that tell you you can legally fly, that there is reference to different airspace. Not only for the test, but to legally fly when working with your drone, you'll want to know the regulations. Now, I got to tell you, this is going to seem really confusing, but take it slow and review this section several times, and you'll start to get a clear understanding of what we're talking about. And remember, all pilots of all aircraft, big and small, have had to learn all of this wacky information, and they do adhere to the laws associated with airspace. We're going to be learning that there are some very specific regulations about what aircraft can do in certain designated airspace. So let's take a look and get started understanding this complicated information. Aircraft pilots refer to charts to identify the airspace that they are or will be flying in. Today, these charts are available in electronic versions, and most pilots have grown up using the actual hard copies, and that's those of us who have been flying for a while know that these maps are a big pain in the neck. They're a big, giant folding map, and there's 37, and here's a diagram that shows 37 sectional charts that cover the U.S. and are relevant to the major cities and airports. Now, these maps cover great detail. There's a lot of information about topography, about hills and mountains and obstacles like wind towers and radio towers. There's lots of information about airports. There are other charts available that are more specific to an area. A TAC, which is a terminal area chart. There is also a chart that is a much bigger scale called the WAC chart, a World Aeronautical Chart. These you'd use for longer haul trip planning. But for the test, we're going to be using what's called the sectional chart. And you'll find in the questions zoomed in pieces of these charts. Now you'll find that these maps show airspace in two categories. Class airspace, which is the space around the airport, and then also special use airspace, which is areas that are designated for things like military operations areas or restricted areas. Here's the diagram that displays the different airspace designations. Now, this is for the designation for airspace around airports. They call this diagram, or the way this is designed, the upside-down wedding cake. And you can kind of see why it kind of looks like that. So let's take a look at the levels. Now, go really slow with this and go back and watch it again and read it and be very, very diligent in getting this, because this is complicated and will seem crazy to you. And you'll wonder, why do I have to know this? Again, we just do. Okay, the first level of airspace is known as Class A airspace. This is where the commercial airplanes fly, and if you see an airplane going overhead, they're generally at 18,000 feet or above sea level, up to 60,000 feet above sea level. Now, we refer to sea level as mean sea level. You'll hear this designation a lot, MSL. MSL stands for above mean sea level, or above sea level. Now, we of course will never get high enough to be into Class A airspace, so we just need to know that it's there. Where airspace information becomes relevant to us is when we start to get around cities and towns that have airports. Airspace around these facilities will be designated with different regulations. So let's take a look at the different airspace designations. Class B is for big airports like Los Angeles or Denver or JFK. You can look at and become familiar with the diagram that shows the different levels and what they will look like in these different airspace plans. These airport spaces are designated in Class B by a solid blue line with circles that indicate the varying altitudes that are allowable for a plane to fly in as that plane gets closer and closer to the airport. And the layer that is the smallest in that upside down wedding cake is the one that's closest to the airport, is closest to the ground. So there are these different layers or tiers at varying altitudes and varying distances from the airport. Now these tiers are used by air traffic control at that airport to keep planes separated from each other. And all the planes are safe as a result of that. And it's worked for many, many years. ATC, air traffic control, will give planes permission to come into that space. Now we, of course, will never be flying in this space above a major airport. We're not allowed, but we will be asked questions on the test that will relate to how our knowledge about these regulations really is known. So pay attention and make sure you're aware of this. Now coming down to the Class C airspace is for smaller regional airports called Class C. This is what Class C looks like on the chart. You'll see that it has a circle or a diagram around the airport that is a solid magenta line. And the varying circles indicate the heights in the upside down wedding cake. Class D is for airports and small, there are small airports. They're like small towns and small city airports. Many of these airports won't have towers for ATC, air traffic control, but they'll still be controlled by the height and the area that is designated as that Class D airspace. Now there's lots of areas that are classed as Class D airspace, and this is what Class D airspace looks like on the chart. There's a dashed blue line around the airspace that is for the airport. And remember, this will be shown on the legend that you will refer to, and we'll talk about the legend again in a minute. Because in the USA there are lots of towns and communities that do have small airports, and because many of these towns are kind of close together, it's true that a lot of the airspace in the United States is in fact Class D. I got my initial flying experience and my private pilot's license in Australia, where there is mostly open space and not a lot of towns with airports. It took me quite a bit to get used to the fact here in the USA that so much of the space in the US is not just Class G. This is, of course, important for us as drone pilots, as we need to make sure that we are not flying in airspace that is regulated beyond what is allowed for our use. Now, we will be looking much more specifically at the chart in a little bit. We'll go over the information you need to know for the test. But this airspace information is important because here, we must have air traffic control or in smaller airports, airport manager permission to fly in Class D airspace. Either ATC or the airport manager must give us permission. Now, of course, we have to have that permission in all controlled airspace, which we probably won't be given permission to fly in Class B or Class C. It's pretty unlikely we'll be able to get that kind of permission to fly in those airspaces. But in Class D, we can get permission, again, from air traffic control, or if there's no tower, from the airport manager at the smaller airport facility. So, for the test, we must know that in order to fly in B, C, or D airspace, here's the question, we must have permission from air traffic control, ATC. No one else will be able to give you permission. Here's the question, as I started to say. You're going to operate inside the B, C, D, or E class airspace. How will you request permission? A, send an email to the airport authority. B, use the online request form for ATC authorization, or call 1-800-WX-BRIEF. The correct answer is B, the online request form for ATC authorization. Now, there are several questions that we'll ask about this in a few different ways in the sample tests, and maybe even on the actual test. But the answer that you will need always, you will need authorization from ATC or permission from the airport manager in smaller airports with no tower. The other part that may be in the question on the test is permission must be obtained 90 days before the date of the proposed flying. So, for flying in controlled airspace, remember, ATC permission is required, and you must obtain that permission 90 days in advance. There are several questions in the sample question PDF ebook that will make sure you are comfortable with this regulation. Just remember that in most cases, the answer is permission from the ATC. Now, we'll be talking about how to identify the different airspace in a particular area when we look at the charts that show those particular areas and particular airports. You're going to learn how to read these charts to identify the airspace for the area you want to fly in. Okay, communication is the next major heading of information that you'll want to and need to know about. Use of an aviation radio is something you'll likely not need to do in the normal course of your drone flying, and some drone pilots actually do operate when they operate within some proximity of an airport or maybe a heliport like a hospital heliport. They'll use a radio to listen to the traffic, but it's not necessary, and you will likely not be talking to other pilots or to ATC. But for the test, you will need to know about what they, ATC and all those other planes, are doing. Now, there are a number of terms that you'll definitely need to know for the test. Every airport operates on a designated frequency. For example, the tower frequency and the CTAF, or the CTAF, which stands for the Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. And that's the frequency that is used when approaching an airport that does not have a tower, the CTAF. Pilots will actually announce their approach and their intentions on the CTAF, and that's the frequency that everybody's listening to as they approach the airport. So when a pilot just announces to the air that they're coming into an airport, everybody hears it. Now, the frequency is found in the Airport Supplement. That's a book you'll need to know about. It's a book that gives all the information about a particular airport, and the frequency is also found there as well as in the aeronautical chart next to the airport that we'll be looking at on the map. Now, we'll be looking at the charts a little bit later, and you'll need to be able to find the CTAF frequency for a given airport as part of your test. Now, you may get a question about the designated frequency for what is called the multicom. That is the frequency that's used when there's no CTAF. Just remember, you'll need to know the frequency for multicom, which is 122.9 and 122.95. Now, you will likely never use multicom, but you may be asked about it on the test. Another radio frequency that you'll want to know is the AWOS, which at larger airports is the Automatic Weather Observation Service frequency. It's found on the chart, and I'll show it to you in just a little bit. And the other one is the ATIS, ATIS, which is the Terminal Information System. All of these terms and frequencies are in the aeronautical chart legend. Now, you'll be given a booklet that has all of the reference charts that you will use in the test. There's an also chart legend page set. You'll want to be very careful during the test to be able to refer to not only the pieces of chart that is to each question, but also the legend that explains every single abbreviation and every diagram and every article that is on the chart. So be prepared to use the legend, and you can download pieces of the legend off of this page, and also you can download the entire booklet that you'll take in for the test from the FAA, so you can be prepared with that. Now, in that, you'll be able to see how you can find the legend will help you find the CTAF frequency. It'll show you where to find the ATIS frequencies and many other pieces of information. So please take the time to download the entire booklet, and you'll also see in this site, the page where you can order the sample question booklet, that there's a downloadable version of most important pages from the booklet rather than the entire book. So you can download the whole book, or you can just download the abbreviated version that will help you. It has lots of diagrams in it and information that's not relevant to the Part 107 test, so you might want that abridged version that you can download for free off of this site on this page. So you'll want to become familiar with this book before you go in for your test, and it will be your main reference. The questions will tell you which diagram to refer to, but learning the pages that explain the legend will be vital. You'll need to know where to go to get the information for several questions in your test. Okay, the next thing we want to take a look at is the science of flying, and there certainly will be a couple of questions about the science of what makes a plane fly. Now again, this is information that is mainly relevant for fixed-wing aircraft, and we of course are flying a drone, but we will need to know some of the basics, some of the physical things, the physical science of flying an airplane just to be able to pass the test. Now one question you're likely to get is in relation to what makes a plane stall. That's the word, stall. I could go into a lot of science here, but the key to know is that a wing will stall. The aircraft wing will stall. That is, it'll stop providing enough lift and it'll fall out of the sky. It'll stall when the aircraft flies and exceeds the aircraft's critical angle of attack. That's the word you'll need to know. And know that the plane will stall at a higher speed when it is in a turn. Any attitude other than straight and level will cause the plane to stall at a higher speed. And you can do a whole lot of reading elsewhere to understand the physics of this, and you don't need to know it, but you'll need to know these two things. A wing will stall when it exceeds its critical angle of attack, and when it's turning, it'll stall at a higher speed. Here's the question. An aircraft will stall when the smooth airflow over the unmanned airplane's wing is disrupted and lift degenerates rapidly. This is caused when the wing A, exceeds the minimum speed, B, exceeds the minimum allowable operating weight, C, exceeds its critical angle of attack. Now you've heard me say this a minute ago. The answer, of course, is C, exceeds its critical angle of attack. And remember, a plane will stall at a higher speed in a turn. There will likely be a question relating to the load factor, that is the stress that's on the airplane. You're likely get a question in the exam. Here's an example. Which basic flight maneuver increases the load factor on an airplane as compared to straight and level flight? A, stalls, B, climbs, C, turns. The answer here is C, turns. Now you may decide to study elsewhere to get the science of why all this happens, but we are really referring to the test in this workshop. And all you need to know is these answers that I just gave you to these sample questions. Here's another question you're likely to get. Refer to the loading chart below. If an airplane weighs 23 pounds, what approximate weight would the airplane structure be required to support during a 60-degree banked turn while maintaining altitude? The answers are A, 23 pounds, B, 34 pounds, or C, 46 pounds. You can see when you look at the chart, it shows that a 60-degree bank, the load factor is 2. So the calculation is to simply multiply the weight of 23 pounds by the factor of 2. So the correct answer is 46 pounds. You might get another question with different weights or different angles of bank, but just use the chart and do the simple multiplication to get the answer. There's 2 or 3 examples of this in my definitive sample question list. They may give you a simple calculator in the test to use. They did for my test, and I didn't need to use it because you'll also get a couple of pages of scratch paper and a pencil, and you may want to use them. Here's another question. When operating an unmanned aircraft, the remote pilot in command, the RPIC, should consider that the load factor on the wings or rotors may be increased any time when the A, center of gravity is shifted rearward to the aft CG limit, B, the aircraft is subjected to maneuvers other than straight and level flight, C, gross weight is reduced. Of course, remember, the answer is B. Remember, more load during turns. So anything other than straight and level will change the load factor. You may get a question that relates to an aircraft center of gravity. Now, this is most relevant, of course, for fixed-wing airplanes, but the one thing you do need to know that relates to the question, this one, when loading cameras or other equipment on the UAS, mount the items in a manner that can A, be easily removed without the use of tools, B, is visible to the visual observer or other crew members, C, does not adversely affect the center of gravity. Here, the correct answer is C. The main thing you need to know is that changing the center of gravity by improperly loading the plane will affect its handling and its maneuverability. With normal airplanes, this information is found in what's called the aircraft manual, and the question may very well ask you about where to find this information for your drone. It's supposed to be in the pilot's operating handbook or the UAS flight manual. Here's the question. To ensure that the unmanned aircraft center of gravity, CG limits, are not exceeded, follow the aircraft loading instructions specified in the A, Pilot Operating Handbook or UAS Flight Manual, B, Aircraft Weight and Balance Handbook, C, Aeronautical Information Manual, AIM. Of course, you know that it's the operations book. So you can find these questions, again, may be confusing, but the issue is we need to memorize where this information is located in order to be able to be ready for the test. And that's what this workshop is all about, making it be that you're ready for the test. Okay, now we need to look at navigation and sectional charts. This is really confusing and tough stuff to learn about if you've never worked with one before. And here's an example of a full sectional chart. And it certainly does look like a crazy dog's breakfast, I know. And it might as well be put into another language. Pilots actually learn from these and in reality today are using electronic versions. You'll likely never need to use one, but for the test, you will have to learn all you can to understand how they're prepared and how to read the information on them. It's very important to know that so far, the people I've talked to about the test, and in my own experience, a high percentage of questions did relate to reading charts, airspace, and other designated information on the chart. So let's take some time to get familiar with the chart and the legend. Now remember, there is a legend for these charts, and you will be given the legend in a booklet that you'll use for the diagrams and information that you'll be asked about during the test. So taking the time to learn this legend before the test is crucial, because most of what you need to know is right here in this legend. So become very, very familiar with it, and before you start looking at the actual chart. Now you'll be given pieces of a sectional chart and asked specific questions on the test. Avoid being too scared or overwhelmed with these charts, because if you just take your time and go very, very slow, looking everywhere on the piece of the chart you're shown, you will likely get the information you need to get the question answered correctly. So don't take this portion of the learning lightly. There are quite a few questions that do relate to the sectional chart, and not being familiar with them may very well prove to be the downfall in passing the test. I can't stress this enough. Learn the chart legend and learn what all of the information on the chart means, because it's important to passing the test, even though you'll likely never ever use it flying your drone. So why do we have to know all of this stuff? Well, we just do. The FAA wants us to have a clear understanding of aviation, not just drone flying. Okay, let's walk into this pile of information by starting with the legend itself. First, notice that there are indication of different airports' airspace with different colors. Blue solid line for Class B, magenta solid line for Class C, and a dashed blue line for Class D. There are other designations that relate to the surface of runways and equipment that's available at the airport and other information. And there's also designation for heliports, there's private runways that are indicated, and others. Now, you won't have to memorize all of this, because remember, you'll be provided with the legend in the book that you have during the test. Over each airport, there is what looks like something like this. This is likely what you'll be asked about on the test. Now, not every airport has all of this information, but what is on an airport will relate to the explanation given on the legend. Now you notice that there's a listing of the radio frequency for the airport, either the control tower or the CTAF. Here it says CT. See right where it says CT? That's the frequency for the control tower. The numbers before the C are for the CTAF. The star between the frequency and the C indicate that the tower is part-time, not open 24 hours a day. The ATIS is the terminal information, services that are offered at the airport. Just take the time to learn where all of this information is and go slow during the questions, and you'll work out what you need to do to answer. You'll see this little collection of information at each airport on the chart. And depending upon the airport, some, but not all of this information will be there. This is where you'll get all of the practice questions in my practice test booklet. They'll really help you to get used to finding this information. Now, doing this and all of these practice, and there's quite a few questions in the practice test, this practice will really help you during the test. Now notice that there are indications on the legend as to what different airspaces are. Remember B, C, or D airspace that we talked about a minute ago? We'll look at the chart in a minute, but here is where you'll be told that the different lines around the airport indicate that blue circle or lines around the airport is Class B, magenta solid line around Class C airspace, and the dotted lines around a Class D airport again are Class D. Now, there will be questions about the ceiling of a class of airspace in a particular location. If a number like this is in a box, in an airspace, it's an indication that the highest level the airspace goes in that particular spot is at a particular altitude. This dashed magenta line of fairly small airports, again, is for Class E. All of the different lines that you will see on the chart will be explained right here on the legend. Now again, don't be overwhelmed by this. Just take your time and just look at the small section of the chart you're being asked about and work it out by referring to the legend. This will take some practice, it'll take some time, so don't rush over these in the practice questions. It is likely that you will get a number of questions that will be on this subject, and it's going to require you to be comfortable with using the legend and the chart. Here's a section on the legend you'll need for the test as well. It relates to the obstructions, like towers that are in the chart. Be sure to remember that this number on top beside the tower indicates mean sea level, the top of the tower at mean sea level. And again, the number in parentheses is for the distance above ground level, AGL. The question might be, how far above the tower at a particular location can you fly? Now we know that we can fly 400 feet above the tower or building as long as we're within 400 feet horizontally. So finding the high point of the tower, reading it on the chart, and then adding 400 feet would be the maximum height we could fly above ground. Learn and understand this and you'll get this question right on the test. And there are several like it in the practice questions. Okay, now that I've explained that these sectional charts can be intimidating if you don't know how to look at them, and if you do go slowly and take your time looking at the small sections at a time, you'll get it. Let's take a look at a chart. I know, pretty scary. But let's go slow and have a look. This is a look at Phoenix, the major airport nearby where I live. Now you'll see that Phoenix is in Class B airspace. Why is that? Because it has a blue line around the airport. And these blue circles coincide with the levels as a plane gets closer to the airport. Remember, they are indicating back to that diagram of the upside down wedding cake. So just imagine that each one of these, as it gets closer, is a narrower layer in the cake and is closer to the ground. As you get closer to the airport, the levels change. You refer to the diagram, and that's what these blue circles indicate. And within each circle is information that indicates what the level of controlled space is limited to. Let me repeat that. Within each circle, information about the space limitations. Okay, let's look at the frequency to listen to the tower. Here are the numbers. 115.6 for the tower. Let's take a look at a smaller airport north of Phoenix. This is Deer Valley, and here we see the number to the left of the letter C is 118.4, and of course the legend tells us that this is the CTAF. Okay, this is back to Phoenix. It is for Class B, and we see the circles around it, so we know from the blue circles, and we see these numbers. They indicate the upper levels for the class airspace in this section of the area around the airport. Remember, the FAA has dropped off 2 zeros of the numbers, so 90 is 9,000 feet as the upper level for the controlled airspace around Phoenix in this circle of the upside down wedding cake. And the lower level is SFC. And if you look at the legend, you'll see that that means surface. So in this section of the upside down wedding cake, from the surface to 9,000 feet, mean sea level, is the controlled space around Phoenix. Here's another airport, Knobs, which is north of Phoenix. Let's just see the little diagram of the runway on the map. See, you can see the orientation of the runway in comparison to the compass, so you know which way the runways are actually going. Remember, all of the information you're going to need is indicated on the legend. Here's a sample question. What is the floor of the Savannah Class C airspace at the shelf area, the outer circle? Now this is right from the FAA sample test question. Look at the numbers. 25 over 13. 25 is the upper level. 13 is the lower level, or the floor of the airspace in the circle indicated, the piece of the wedding cake. Now remember, as the legend tells you, these numbers are above sea level. The number in relation to these heights are above mean sea level. And remember, the map has dropped off 2 zeros. So 25 becomes 2,500, 13 becomes 1,300. Here's a small community airport. It's Sedona, Arizona. See the faded magenta line around the space? It's indicating that according to the legend, this is Class E airspace. And what this means, according to the legend, from the surface up to 700 feet AGL, this space is uncontrolled airspace. Referring to the legend will tell you this. So lines around the airports, if it's a solid blue line around the airport, it's Class B. Solid magenta line is Class C airspace, and a dashed blue line is Class D airspace. The dashed magenta line is Class E, and as I just said for like Sedona, a faded magenta line is Class E, above 700 feet AGL. A faded blue line is Class E, above 1,200 feet AGL. And you'll see that all of these are in the legend, so you don't have to memorize them. Just refer to the legend and go slow. Take your time. You've got 2 hours to do this test. The number in the dashed box tells you the ceiling of the Class D airspace in hundreds of feet. Here's another close-up from the chart. See this little red flag? Refer to the legend and you'll see that it indicates a VFR waypoint, which is General Aircraft Flying Visual Flight Rules, a VFR waypoint. And what that means is you may see more general aviation traffic near this point. Of course, these planes are not flying anywhere near the level that is our maximum, 400 feet. They're nowhere near that low, so they're not 400 feet above ground. But we're supposed to know this as part of the testing for our certification. There was a question about the little flag and the VFR waypoints on my test, and it is in the Sample E book of questions. Here's another zoom in to one piece of a sectional map. You'll see for the Warwick Airport that it has a solid magenta line circle around the airport, which means it is a Class C airport. You'll also see the number 41 over the letters SFC. This means the upper limit of the Class C airspace in that circle is 4,100 feet, and it goes all the way down to the surface. And that is what SFC stands for, remember, surface. You'll also see other info around this airport, like this little pointy peak tells you of the height of the peak surrounding the airport. Just refer to the legend to see exactly what those numbers mean. You'll also see other indications of skydiving, glider operations, and balloons. Just refer to the legend. The little pictures, of course, kind of refer to the type of activity that's going on in that space. Here's a question relating to the hazard on the chart. This is straight out of my sample questions. Refer to the chart below, Figure 20, Area 3, as well as the sectional legend. With ATC authorization, you are operating your small unmanned aircraft approximately 4 statute miles southeast of Elizabeth City Regional Airport. What hazard is indicated to be in that area? A, an unmarked balloon on a cable up to 3,008 feet, MSL. B, an unmarked balloon on a cable up to 3,008 feet, AGL. C, high-density military operations in the vicinity. Well, let's just look at the chart, and you'll see the answer is A. And the information is right here on the chart. Unmarked balloon on a cable up to 3,000 feet, MSL. On the question, which frequency for CTAF frequency, just look at the chart, refer to the legend, and you'll see the frequency is listed before the C. You will likely get questions about prohibited areas indicated on the map. In a prohibited area, you are not allowed to fly. Prohibited basically means that, it's prohibited. This would be like around the White House in Washington. The prohibited areas are indicated by a blue combed line around the area, and we'll have a P and a number in the box, and it's explained on the legend. Now, restricted areas indicate areas that you should be aware of. They're not prohibited, but are restricted by different requirements. You'll see on the map there are blue lines, the blue comb with an R and a number to indicate what it is. Now, usually you'll find the information another place on the sectional map about the restricted areas. So you'll find the sample test questions will ask about who to call to get information about these restricted areas. MOA indicates a military operations area, like this on the map with a magenta combed line. The military may be doing exercises at low levels. Now, you can fly in an MOA, and you want to be very careful of flying in that area. Here's a sample question. What action should a remote pilot take when operating in a military operations area? A, obtain authorization from the controlling agency prior to operating in the MOA. B, exercise extreme caution when military activity is being conducted. C, fly only along military training routes. The correct answer to this one is B. Exercise extreme caution when military activity is being conducted. You just need to learn that and memorize the question for the test. What I've done, the first 13 questions are the toughest questions on the test, and they seem to be the ones that are missed by most people who do take the test. They're the most often missed. What I've done is I've included a more detailed explanation of the answer, for example, to that question that I just gave you, on the question list. Remember, I highly suggest that you order the sample question list to give you the very best chance of being prepared for the exam. And you can get it right here on the site. You can get it downloaded immediately. You'll find it on the Order the Sample Questions page. Okay, next subject. You'll need to know what longitude and latitude means and how to read the numbers of longitude and latitude on the map. You probably already know that the lines of latitude go around the Earth like the equator does, and they read up and down, north and south of the equator. The way I remember it is it's lat, like a ladder, like climbing a ladder. And longitude lines are the lines that go east and west, emanating from a line through Greenwich, England, and go all the way around the Earth, long lines, longitude up and down. The unit of measure we use to identify these lines is degrees. Now, for the test, you're going to need to be able to identify the locations by longitude and latitude designation. And you will be asked to give the longitude and latitude of a specific place. Now, these questions relate to pieces, and thankfully, cropped and zoomed pieces of a sectional map. Here's an example on the map. This number, 41 degrees, is showing you the number for latitude and is being read by the line that are going up and down, going around the Earth, similar to the equator, up and down. The other number, 70, is reading the long line or the longitude. The latitude numbers go up as they go towards the top of the map, away from the equator. And you'll only be given questions in the northern hemisphere, thankfully. The lines and the numbers go upward as you view further north in the northern hemisphere. Now, they go down as the numbers approach the equator. So if you're going downwards towards the equator in the northern hemisphere, they go down. They go up if you're moving away from the equator towards the top of the map in the northern hemisphere. The longitude numbers increase as they go west or to the left on the map as you're reading the map. And they reduce as they go east or as they go to the right on the map. Now, each little line or notch on the line is counted as 1 minute. The slightly larger lines indicate 5 minutes, and the larger line marks indicate 10 minutes. Now, the line between the two numbers on the map indicate 30 minutes. Now, there is a full line that indicates the 30 minutes between the main numbers. Remember, the distance between the main numbers is 60 minutes, but there's a line between that's 30 minutes. Okay, here's a sample question. You refer to this particular map. Which airport is located at approximately 46 degrees, 93 minutes north and 98 degrees, 2 minutes west longitude? And you'll have to find this on the map. It's either A, Cooperstown, B, Jamestown Regional, or C, Barnes County. The answer here is Barnes County C. And if you just go slow and count the little notches from the larger numbers and remember the direction that the numbers go, you'll get this one. Maybe go back and re-watch what I just said again, talking if you're a little bit confused about this. But notice that this is a question number 13 on the sample test. There is a much more detailed explanation on that particular question. As I said, the first 13 are the toughest ones on the test. The first 13 questions have a much longer answer and a lot more description about them right in the sample book. They're the tough ones that are missed the most often. So remember, 0 degrees latitude is the equator. 0 degrees longitude is the prime meridian, which goes through Greenwich, England. Now, you don't need to know this for the test, but you will need to be able to read the degrees and the minutes of both longitude and latitude. Remember, if they ask you to find 70 degrees and 15 minutes, you will find 70, and if it's longitude, 70, go west, left, and count 15 small line marks. Use the medium-sized notch to indicate you've reached 5, the larger notch to indicate that you've reached 10. And make your time, just take your time and count, and you'll slowly, when you do it really slowly, you'll work it out. Now, I had a question that related to the difference between magnetic north and true north. A compass, like you have in your car or you've seen in boats and in airplanes, a compass will point to the point known as magnetic north. The map does not indicate magnetic north. It indicates what is called true north. So, for the test, you need to know the difference is indicated on this sort of a map that indicates the variation in different parts of the world between magnetic north, shown by a compass, and true north that is shown on the map. Just know that there's a difference. You are required to know a lot of information about airports. Of course, it is illegal to fly your drone within 5 miles of an airport without permission, which is likely you won't be given, especially at major airports. But the question might indicate that you have been hired to photograph the control tower at an airport. The answer to this type of question is that you must have prior approval from air traffic control to be able to do that. And of course, it's absolutely a given that you remember that you're required to submit a request via the online portal to the FAA for that permission 90 days in advance, as I said, through the FAA online portal. So you won't be able just to call up ATC on the day and get permission to go out and film around or fly your drone and film around the airport. In the real world, it's so unlikely that you'll ask for or be given permission, but you need to know it for the test. Something else you need to know for your test is how the runways are configured at airports. Runways are set up to relate to the usual wind direction at the location of the airport. It's best for an airplane to take off and land into the wind, and airports have been set up to allow that to happen considering the usual wind directions that are known in that area. So what you'll need to know is the runway number that a plane will take off and land on is the direction on a compass. So if a plane is taking off to the north, the number on the compass would be 360 degrees. If it's taking off to the south, the number on the compass would be 180 degrees. It's taking off to the east, it would be 90 degrees. To the west, it would be 270 degrees. Now, for the purposes of numbering the runway, the 0 is left off the runway designation. So the plane landing to the north using runway 36, 360 degrees. The plane landing to the south would be 18, which is 180 degrees. East is 09 and west is 27. We've just taken the 0 off. Now, when you're asked one of these questions, I know I probably confused you, just use the scratch paper and draw a little circle to indicate a compass, put the north, south, and east, west numbers on it, 360, 180, 90, 270, and you'll work it out. You'll need to know the pattern that airplanes follow as they approach an airport and land. Now remember that a plane will usually keep the airport on the left side of the aircraft. The pilot sits in the left seat, he likes to look out the window and be able to see very well. So in most instances, the pilot will keep, in most airports, unless it's a special situation, the runway will be on the left of the aircraft. So you want to know the name of the leg of the pattern. Now, here's an example. The pattern is the box that an aircraft will follow to enter the airport and runway space. Upwind is the leg in the direction the plane will finally land in. Crosswind is the leg that crosses the end of the runway that will be used. Downwind is the leg opposite to the direction the plane will land. He turns base as the last leg before the plane then turns to line up on the runway for what is called final approach. Now, these will be important to know, particularly the downwind and base legs. I had a question that asked how a plane will approach the airport. And even though there are several ways it can be approached, the answer was 45 degrees to the downwind leg. There are a couple of questions in the definitive sample test question list that will help you with this. And remember that usually the pilot will keep the runway on his left as the plane is flown, or her left as the plane is flown, through the legs of the pattern. Okay, you'll need to be aware of paperwork and other published documents that relate to the FAA rules. You'll likely get a question that relates to the aircraft user manual. An airplane will have a user manual that relates to many things that we will never use as drone pilots. Stall speed of the aircraft, maintenance schedule are two of the things that you might get a question about. Of course, most drone manuals don't have a maintenance schedule, but you may very well be asked where to find the maintenance schedule for the aircraft. Just remember, it is the aircraft user manual. You may get a question about what to do if the manual does not provide a maintenance schedule from the manufacturer. The answer is that you, as the pilot in command, the PIC, you are responsible for setting a maintenance schedule. And again, we don't do maintenance on our drones, really. We just send them in and have them repaired if we need to, but you'll probably get that type of question. Here's an example. Under what condition should the operator of a small UA establish scheduled maintenance protocol? A, when the FAA requires you to, following an accident. B, UAS does not need a required maintenance schedule, or C, when the manufacturer does not provide a maintenance schedule. The answer, as I suggested a minute ago in the explanation, is C. Of course, as I said, we don't do maintenance on our drones, but it's a question you'll need to know, so memorize the answer and you'll be ready. Of course, one other document that you should know about and be familiar with is the sectional chart. They may ask you where you get information about the airspace surrounding an airport. They may ask you about its class of airspace. They may ask you about the limits of the upside-down wedding cake, those circles of airspace. What are the levels of airspace is one of the things you'll be asked about. It's all in the sectional chart. An important document to know about is the chart supplement book. I mentioned it earlier, but this is a book that has lots of detailed information about each airport that you will be checking on. Here's a sample question. The most comprehensive information on a given airport is provided by A, the chart supplement, US, formerly the Airport Facility Directory, B, Notice to Airmen, C, the Terminal Area Chart. The answer here is A, the chart supplement. You will need to know about NOTAMs. A NOTAM, N-O-T-A-M, stands for a Notice to Airmen. And it's a notice released on an as-need basis, things like specific no-fly zones at a specific time frame, often only hours of one day. It will give you information about construction on the runway, the hours the runway might be affected. There may be a NOTAM telling you that mowing is going on beside a specific runway. Here's a sample question. How would a remote PIC check NOTAMs as noted in a caution box on a sectional chart regarding the unmarked balloon? A, by utilizing the Before You Fly mobile application. B, by obtaining a briefing via an online source such as 1-800-WXBrief.com. C, by contacting the FAA district office. The answer here is B. So learn that, understand that, and know that there'll be an online website where you'll connect and find out the NOTAMs. There are other online sources for NOTAMs, but this is the question. The correct answer would be to go to 1-800-WXBrief.com. Okay, another document that you're going to have access to, and one that is going to be very important for you to know a lot about for the test, is a METAR. This is a meteorological report for an area, and there is another document that is even more detailed to a specific airport. It's called a TAF, which is a terminal area forecast. Now, these are weather reports, and they're really challenging documents. And at first, they will confound the smartest person who sees these things, and they can confound you on the test if you're not prepared. So it's very, very important that you take the time to learn all of the abbreviations and all of the information on a METAR and a TAF. Now, this area is one of the hardest things to get into your head, and is often the reason that people fail the test, because they miss the METAR and TAF reports. So the other is, of course, as I said earlier, reading the sectional chart. So spending a lot of time studying this information is quite vital to passing the test. And there are lots of example questions in my definitive sample question list that you can order and download, and it'll help get you ready for these reports. Okay, let's first look at a METAR. A METAR is a meteorological report, and it's in a format for reporting weather information. A METAR weather report is predominantly used by pilots in the fulfillment of a part of a pre-flight weather briefing. And even though there may be many apps available and all sorts of other information telling us what the weather is, we will need to know how to read the same reports that aircraft pilots have been using for decades. Now, I know this is going to seem irrelevant in this era where all we have to do is go to our phone and pull up an app and read the information. But for the test, you'll have to be able to master the info on a METAR. Here's an example. Yeah, I know. It looks like it's been written in another bloody language, and it has. It's been written in aviation weather language. And even though it seems absolutely daunting to figure out, once you learn the code to decipher it, all of this information, all of this info will be really easy for you to be able to get. And importantly, you'll get the test questions right. Now, there are several questions in my definitive sample question list that you can get from me, and it'll challenge your ability to read a METAR, and I challenge you, don't gloss over this, because many drone pilots struggle with the test because of not understanding this information. So here's a sample of a METAR. Let's go through it step by step. The first block is relating to the type of report. It says METAR, and there are others like a TAF, which we'll look at in just a minute. But this is referring to a report as a METAR. Next is the code for the airport, and it has a K in front of it. So KDEN would be Denver, KLAX, of course, would be Los Angeles, and so on. The next block ends in a Z. Now, this is an indication that it will be about time. The Z indicates Zulu time, which is what we refer to as universal time. You may have heard to it as referred to as GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. You may have heard to it referred to as UTC, which stands for Coordinated Universal Time. But there are other ways to say Zulu time, but in the METAR, the Z tells us that it's going to be related to time. The first two digits relate to the day of the month. Now, since these are issued right now, the month is not there because we're not going to be looking at a report a month ahead or a month behind. But the day of the month is this day of this month. The next numbers indicate the time of day. 1853 is the time on a 24-hour clock, and that's 1853 Zulu time, Greenwich Mean Time. In practical use terms, you of course will convert Zulu time to your local time, and you can find the information on how to do that easily. But for the test, you will keep your thinking and your answers in Zulu time. So this report was issued at this time, 1853 on the 24-hour clock, Zulu time. Next, you'll see auto. This indicates that this METAR was issued with the use of an automatic weather reporting setup. This next block is the wind speed and direction at the time of the report being issued. The first three numbers indicate the direction of the wind that the wind is coming from. So the number 170 would indicate that the wind is coming from 170 degrees. And you of course would know that that means that the wind is coming from mostly from the south. The next two numbers, 22, means that the wind speed is at 22 knots per hour. The METAR will read the wind speed in nautical miles per hour, 22 knots. Then G. This stands for gusts or gusting, and the number 28 means it's gusting to 28 knots. Now here's another METAR with a different example. The wind speed here is indicated by VRB, which indicates variable winds at 8 knots. The direction of the wind is not a specific direction, but is shifting, so they've given it variable. Let's go back to the METAR that we were looking at a minute ago. The next block that ends in SM is going to relate to visibility. SM means statute miles. So whenever you see SM, it usually relates to visibility. And 1/2 means 1/2 statute mile. So the horizontal distance you can see forward at the surface is 1/2 of a mile, which of course is not good for us to fly, as we have to be able to see 3 statute miles of visibility to fly. But that is what the report is saying. Visibility is 1/2 statute miles horizontally at the surface of the airport. A different example would be 5 SM, which is 5 statute miles of visibility. The next block indicates that there are what the real conditions are at the time of the report. The TSRA indicate both thunderstorm and rain. TS, thunderstorm, RA, rain. Now, if there was a plus, it would indicate heavy thunderstorms and rain. So that's what that means. Here we also see BR, which is the abbreviation for mist. Now these are in a legend to help you identify them, and there are many other that are like sand and volcanic ash and other conditions. But for the test, you will likely only need to know thunderstorms, rain, and mist. The next block indicates the cloud cover And the way we decipher this code is BKN, which means broken. So the ceiling above the airport has a broken cloud barrier, and 0007 means 700 feet. Remember, like before, the FAA has dropped off the 2 zeros, so the cloud ceiling is broken at 700 feet. Now, make sure to get this really clearly understood, as people do make a lot of mistakes by adding the wrong number of zeros to the report. 2 zeros have been dropped off, so if they're giving us cloud information, so the report is broken at 700. Now, the next block, OVC, means overcast. 13 is the height with the 2 zeros dropped off, so it's overcast ceiling of sky at 1,300 feet above the ground, and CB, which means cumulonimbus. Those are the great big dangerous big puffy rain and storm type clouds that are really scary and bad for all aircraft to go into. Now, we've seen BKN, which is broken, OVC, which is overcast. You might also see SKC or CLR or FEW, which means clear, very few clouds, or scattered, which means scattered clouds. SCT means scattered. The last block here indicates the ground temperature and the dew point. Now, the temperatures are in Celsius. You won't have to convert to Fahrenheit for the test, but these temps are the ones on the METAR. And by the way, the dew point is the indicator that you might be seeing fog or mist, because if the dew point is within 3 degrees of the temperature, there is a possibility for moisture to be forming on the plane. And we have seen here before that we have rain and we have mist, so we need to know that. A TAF, a TAF, is a terminal aerodrome forecast, and it relates to a smaller area, just more specifically around the airport. Now, to really help in this cracking code exercise, let's look at a TAF report and figure out the things that we need to read. The first block in this TAF says the kind of report. The next is the airport code, just like in the METAR. The next block is the date and time that the report was issued. So it's on the 11th at 11:30 Zulu time. This next block indicates how long the TAF is valid for. So we see that this report is good on the 11th at 12 Zulu until the 12th at 12 Zulu. This report is valid for a 24-hour period. Here, the word tempo stands for temporary. So they are indicating that within the report, some information will be temporary, so we will need to decipher what changes are forecast during the hours that this TAF is good for. Next, we see the time relating to this temporary change. Tempo, from 12 to 1400 hours on the 11th. So for those 2 hours, we will expect to see the visibility of 5 statute miles. BR, which is mist, we saw that earlier, and then a new time from 1500 Zulu. This next code will relate to the wind. It ends with a KT, so we know that your indication that it will be a wind forecast, KT standing for knots. The first 3 numbers are 140, is the direction the wind will be coming from. The next numbers relate to the velocity of the wind. You'll see it's 15 knots with gusts to 25. Starting to get the hang of this? The next number is ending in SM, which of course we know is statute miles. So we know that it is our indication that that particular number is going to relate to visibility. Here, it is more than 6 statute miles. So it's 6 statute miles visibility during this time frame. Now the next block relates to the cloud cover. This indication is SCT, which is scattered at 040. Now we of course add 2 more zeros to the number 040 to answer that the cloud cover is scattered at 4,000 feet and broken clouds at 250. We add 2 zeros, so that means broken cloud at 25,000 feet. The next block indicates that there's an expected change at a particular time. That means FM, from the 12th at midnight Zulu time, the wind will change to 160 degrees, from 160 at 12 knots. So it's at 160 degrees at 12 knots of speed. And the visibility will be more than 6 statute miles. The cloud will be broken at 8,000 feet above the ground and overcast, completely full cloud cover, at 15,000 feet. Are you with me decoding this? Next is prob 30. This is decoded as 30% probability that there will be from the 12th day at midnight until 400 hours a decrease in the visibility to 3 statute miles and an occurrence of thunderstorms and rain. And the cloud ceiling will be fully overcast at 3,000 feet with the presence of cumulonimbus clouds. And then temporary from 0400 Zulu, the wind will be from 180 at 8 knots, and the visibility will be more than 6 statute miles. The cloud will be scattered at 4,000 feet and overcast at 8,000 feet. And then temporarily from 400 until 800 hours, on the 12th, the visibility will reduce to 3 statute miles with thunderstorms and rain. The cloud cover will be overcast at 3,000 feet with the presence of cumulonimbus clouds. I know, this can seem head-breaking, but if you scrub the video backwards to the beginning of this section and then watch it several times over and over, you'll begin to get the hang of it and become comfortable. The sample questions you'll view will really help you as well. Just remember, take your time, go really slow and deliberate, and really read the report before you look for the answer. You will get pretty good at this. Learning to read these documents, the METAR and the TAF, is not really that difficult once you crack the code. One of the most important pieces of information and observation that affects pilots and flying aircraft of any kind, of course, is the weather. And there will be several questions on the test that relate to weather conditions. And like I said, there are a number of questions in the sample test list that will give you lots and lots of practice deciphering these reports. A term and phenomenon that you will need to know about is called density altitude. And this relates to the fact that air gets thinner the higher you go above ground. High density altitude relates to the air density at high levels. Low density altitude relates to the air at low levels. It does not mean high density like thick air. It means high density in relation to height. Now, a question you may get, and you'll see it in the practice test questions as well, is how will an aircraft perform at high density altitude? Here's the question. What effect does high density altitude have on the efficiency of a UA propeller? A, density altitude does not affect propeller efficiency. B, propeller efficiency is increased. C, propeller efficiency is decreased. The answer is C. The efficiency is decreased. Remember, as you go high, air is thinner, and the propeller has less to bite into, and so is less effective. Low density means the plane is low in the air, and that's where the air is thicker. High is inefficient. Low density altitude is more efficient. Another weather question that you may get is in relation to weather fronts. A front is a line between two air masses. You've likely heard the word cold front, warm front, stationary front. These are depicted on a weather map, and a weatherman will refer to them during our weather reports. So for you, and the practical thing to know is that a front divides weather patterns. Usually two different air masses of high pressure and low pressure measured by a barometer. Here's a sample question relating to weather fronts. When the forces of two air masses are relatively equal, The boundary or front that separates them remains stationary and influences the local weather for days. This front is called a blank. A, warm front. B, cold front. C, stationary front. The correct answer here is a stationary front, and the clue was actually in the question. We see the word stationary. There are several other questions on fronts in the sample question list, and you don't need to be a weather expert on fronts. Just memorize the questions in the sample question list, memorize the answers, and you will likely be okay for the test. Wind shear is a term that relates to a phenomenon that affects aircraft. Wind shear is defined as a sudden dramatic change in wind direction and speed. Now, it's important to remember that they can happen at any altitude, and this phenomenon can be dangerous for any aircraft. It can blow us right off course, but close to the ground can push our craft and make it hard to land or take off effectively. But for the test, you'll need to know that they're likely going to occur close to the ground. There are several other wind shear questions in the sample test that you will want to memorize the answers to. Something else you'll want to be aware of when it comes to weather is structural icing. Icing occurs generally at higher altitudes and when moisture or water strikes the aircraft at below freezing temperatures and begins to form an ice layer on the craft. Makes it heavy and changes the shape of the wing, makes it hard to fly. Again, we will never likely experience it ourselves, but you'll need to know about it for the test. The ice forming changes the shape of the wing and therefore the airflow over it and can cause difficulty for the plane to stay aloft. In addition, if it's severe, it can add substantial weight to the plane, which of course will make it harder to fly as well. Either way, it's going to affect the normal controllability of an airplane and make it dangerous. So here's a sample question, and there are a couple of others in the sample question guide. You will possibly get a question on it in your test. I got one. The abundance of large supercooled water droplets makes clear icing development very rapid between blank, and encounters can be frequent in A, 0 degrees and -1 degrees Celsius. B, 0 degrees and -5 degrees Celsius, a cluster of cells. C, 0 degrees Celsius and -15 Celsius, and a cluster of cells. Memorize this one. The answer here is C, 0 degrees Celsius and -15 C, and a cluster of cells. Another weather condition that will affect aircraft, of course, are thunderstorms. You know the time in the afternoon when those great big puffy cumulonimbus clouds form in the sky and we get those thunder boomers. You, of course, will never be flying through those, but the FAA wants you to have an appreciation of the danger of flying around them. The storm starts with rising air and making the towering cumulus clouds in that developing period of the thunderstorm cycle. The second sequence of the life cycle is called the mature stage, and the third stage is called the dissipating stage. You'll want to know the answer to the sample question that asks, when in the thunderstorm cycle is it likely that downdrafts can form? The answer is, memorize this, dissipating. At the end of the storm, you may see that the lower levels of the air, downdrafts of strong wind will occur, and they are very, very dangerous as the plane can be pushed to the ground by a downdraft of air. Now, having said that, the most dangerous level in the sequence, of course, is the mature stage when there's lots of turbulence near and in the storm. So it's the most dangerous during the mature stage, but the downdrafts can happen during the dissipating stage of the thunderstorm. Now, you will never fly in a thunderstorm, but you'll need to know the answer to these questions. Here's an example. Low-level wind shear is commonly associated with passing A, hurricanes and tornadoes, B, frontal systems, thunderstorms and temperature inversions, C, calm winds and rain. Of course, the correct answer here is B. Now, of course, at different times of the year, different weather patterns that you will see a variation in humidity will cause a different level of moisture in the air. The two things to know for the test are that higher humidity makes for poor visibility. It can form hazy conditions, and because it makes the air thicker, we know from our low and high density altitude questions that when the air is thicker, it will improve the efficiency of an aircraft. So high humidity reduces visibility and increases the performance of the aircraft. Now, you'll see several questions in the definitive sample question test list relating to unstable and stable air. What you'll want to remember is that unstable air is hot and humid and produces more turbulence and can make for showers of rain. Conversely, stable air will produce smoother flying and can produce poor visibility and steady precipitation. You'll find a number of questions in the sample guide relating to stable and unstable air. Just don't get confused. Memorize the answers and it'll set you up for the questions and you'll get the questions right. Learn the cloud terms. Nimbus and stratus nimbus are clouds relating to rain. Stratus are high, thin clouds. Weather questions and reading the weather information reports are very important areas to study and learn. So looking at all of those questions that relate to that will be very, very important for you as you do your studying and do your preparation. Many prospective pilots fall down in these areas, so you can't gloss over this. Don't skip over this information because you'll want to dig deep into the sample question list to understand the type of questions you're likely to get on your test about weather. Okay, that's all been pretty heavy. Let's move on to something a little bit more fun. When we're out flying, we may very well be all alone by ourselves and maybe working, of course, with a team that's supporting you. One team position that will be referred to in the questions is the visual observer. This is a person that has eyes on the aircraft to support the pilot in command. They're watching out for obstacles like trees and power lines and other aircraft. And if the PIC is using goggles to view what the camera is seeing, it's a requirement to have a visual observer to have eyes on the craft. Remember, we've got to be able to see our aircraft at all times. There will be, without a doubt, questions relating to the visual observer on the test, and they're certainly in the sample question list that I can provide for you. The majority of questions that relate to the crew for the aircraft will relate to the pilot in command, referred to as the PIC or the R remote PIC, the remote pilot in command. There are several questions that all have the same answer. They'll keep asking you about the ultimate responsibility for many things. And during the flight, one person is responsible, and that's the PIC, pilot in command. Here are a couple of sample questions. According to 14 CFR Part 107, who's responsible for determining the performance of a small unmanned aircraft? A, remote pilot in command. B, manufacturer. C, owner or operator. The answer is, as I've said before here, the remote pilot in command. Here's another one. Who is ultimately responsible for preventing a hazardous situation before an accident occurs? A, the visual observer. B, the remote pilot in command. C, the person manipulating the controls. Of course, the answer here is B, the remote pilot in command. So just remember, the PIC is responsible for most all aspects of the flight unless the question asks who's responsible for helping the remote pilot in command keep track of the drone. In this case, it will be the visual observer. Really read the questions well, and in most cases, the answer will be the pilot in command because you're ultimately responsible. There may be a question on the test, and certainly in the sample test questions, relating to crew resource management, or CRM. The RPIC must be responsible for managing the team that is the crew. In other words, they're not fooling around, they're not talking to bystanders, having a little drink, etc. Risk management is another area you'll need to know about. The FAA has identified a certain list of risk factors that they consider risks for a pilot and crew. Now, this first one will likely never affect you as a drone pilot, but may very well affect the pilot of a plane. It's hyperventilation. This is breathing way too fast and taking in too much oxygen and getting disoriented because it makes you dizzy to have too much oxygen. It can happen because of a panic in a dangerous thing that's going on, or just nervousness where somebody starts breathing too fast. Now, there may be a question like the one in the sample list of how you can overcome hyperventilation. Here's the question. A pilot should be able to overcome the symptoms or avoid future occurrences of hyperventilation by A, slowing the breathing rate into a bag by breathing into a bag or talking. B, closely monitoring the aircraft's telemetry data. Or C, increasing the breathing rate in order to increase lung ventilation. The answer, of course, is because of what I just said, is A. Slowing the breathing rate, breathing into a bag, or talking. The other human performance question you may get, and I got one on this test, is about fatigue. Here's the FAA sample question. You are a remote pilot for a co-op energy service provider. You are to use your UA to inspect power lines in a remote area 15 hours away from your home office. After the drive, fatigue impacts your abilities to complete your assignment on time. Fatigue can be recognized, A, easily by an experienced pilot, B, as being in an impaired state, or C, by an ability to overcome sleep deprivation. The answer is B. And this is exactly the question I got on my real test at the FAA. We are visual pilots, and as such, depend on our ability to see the aircraft in the sky that we are flying. The FAA has a recommended way that we scan the sky. The method is to systematically focus on different areas in the sky. Now, they may ask this in a couple of ways, but you will want to know this question. Which technique should a pilot use to scan for traffic? A, concentrate on relative movement detected in the peripheral vision area. B, systematically focus on different segments of the sky for short intervals. C, continuous sweeping of the windshield from left to right. Here, the correct answer is B. Systematically focus on different segments of the sky for short intervals. Now, the FAA has also deemed that there's a number of personality traits that can create hazards in flying. Display of these personality traits can certainly increase the risk of poor flying habits. The first one is macho. This is the pilot that wants to show off. The most dangerous word you'll hear a macho pilot say is this: watch this. Here's a sample question. Identify the hazardous attitude or characteristic a remote pilot displays while taking risks in order to impress others. A, macho, B, invulnerability, C, impulsivity. And you can imagine that the correct answer here is A, macho. The second personality trait that can be dangerous is impulsivity. Lack of thinking things through or lack of following a clear plan. Doing things on a whim. The third personality trait that the FAA wants you to be able to identify and know the antidote to is invulnerability. It won't happen to me, or I could not be wrong. The antidote is considered in this question. What is the antidote when a pilot has a hazardous attitude such as invulnerability? A, it could happen to me. B, it will not happen to me. And C, it cannot be that bad. The answer, of course, is A. The antidote is it could happen to me. The next personality trait that you may be asked about is resignation. There's nothing I can do. The accident just is going to happen. I am resigned to the drama. Of course, the antidote here is I can do something to prevent the accident. I am capable and can change the circumstance. And the final personality trait the FAA wants you to know about is anti-authority. The rules are for others, not me. I can do anything I want. Of course, the antidote is follow the rules. Okay, now just before we finish, it's important to take a look at the tough sections that you will want to review. In my research, I came across a listing of the most missed questions on the test. And even though your brain is a bit fried right now, you might want to come back and look at these again, either now or later. People fail the test because of not knowing these. The main areas of difficulty for most people are effects of weather like thunderstorms, density, altitude, temperature inversions, and you'll find a number of questions in the sample question list about these things. The other area is reading weather reports. Remember the METAR and the TAF documents. They look like hieroglyphics. But taking a slow approach and going through the things we've discussed here will really help you a lot. The other stumbling block for a lot of people is, of course, reading the sectional charts. They look, as I said, like a dog's breakfast at first, and the more you zero in on an area of the chart, the question refers to, and go very, very slow and use the legend, and you'll find that the information is all there. Holy cow, there it is. There it all is. This is the information that I studied and clearly understood before I took the test. And I watched a number of online tutorials, and they all together got me to understand the information that I have given you in this big, long tutorial workshop. When you look at all of the sample tests I could find, and I looked at a lot of sample tests, none of them, even the FAA test, had all of the information that was needed to pass the test. So it was the conglomeration of all of these samples that gave me the knowledge. That is why I've assembled all of the questions that I could find to make the definitive test list, and it's available to you. I've included the tough questions at the very beginning of that definitive test question list, so it's true that if you can go through those ones that are particularly tough and a lot of additional explanations, you'll improve and get them right. Now, I've repeated those questions right through the full list on the PDF, but I want you to take those first 13 questions very, very seriously and go really slow. Maybe referring back to this video by watching it again and again, and especially sections that are tough for you. Help you through those tough questions. The first 13, I've included that explanation of how to arrive at the correct answer. So working through understanding how to get the answer, as well as then memorizing a lot of the information in the 250 some odd questions, you'll be right. They're right at the beginning. Those tough ones are right at the beginning of the PDF. So going back and studying and restudying these will be important. Now, I got these questions, or ones like them, right on my test because I knew they were tough. And it is because I didn't take these tough areas lightly. I don't think anyone would say that this is an easy test, because it's not. It will require you to study and practice a lot. And I recommend that you watch this video at least 3 times. Take notes each time, and maybe go back to certain sections that are your tough areas and watch those sections through the table of contents that's below here. Watch them over and over again a few times. And then take the sample test question list at least 5 times. If you need more detailed information than I've given you, then use Google to find the written explanation of some of the other specific things, because you'll want to understand everything you need to know. So thanks a lot for watching and participating in this unbelievably long workshop. And with all of the resources available to you, I wish you all the very best in your prep for taking the exam. I'm your drone test wizard, Gary Glenn. Thanks for watching.